Reverend Stephanie Spellers is a priest with the United States National Episcopal Church, and she joins us from New York City. Thank you so much for giving us your time today. What we've seen this past year, if you take COVID and you take Black Lives Matter, two enormous events in the United States, and they really do converge, don't they, given the overrepresentation of African Americans and the worst of the COVID statistics. How are these things playing out in this election?
I mean, honestly, it's mobilizing people. So many African Americans and so many people who stand with us have seen the numbers around COVID. They've seen the history of voter suppression. They've seen the elimination of Black lives in America, not only in the last few years, but for centuries. And I think that for a lot of people, there's a sense that enough is enough. And I see that among white people. I see that among our Latino allies. I see that across the spectrum, and it is heartening.
Can I ask, it started at Charlottesville, didn't it, when the president was asked again to condemn the white nationalists on that occasion, and he said, "Look, there's issues on both sides," and that was yes, read in very particular ways in very particular parts of the electorate. Then he went and stood outside a church affiliated with your own in Washington DC, and he held up a Bible. What do you think that signified?
I think for some of the president's supporters, what that signified was, that he is with them. When they saw the Bible, many of them felt excited. They felt like there's someone who speaks for our faith. For many of us, maybe even more of us, especially among Episcopalians, we were horrified, honestly. We felt that the Bible was being used as a prop. We felt that faith in general was being used as a political tool. And that there wasn't much focus on the meaning inside the Bible. Because if you look in that book, what you see are values that are centered on love, justice, mercy, standing up with the poor, standing up with the oppressed, guarding the stranger, protecting and welcoming the refugee. Frankly, things that just if you look policy-wise, you don't see alignment between what our current president has stood for and what the Bible actually communicates.
You know, if we look at the issue of race, it is built into the fabric of the United States, that idea of the colour line defining America and defining politics. If you look at the Obama years, for all of the talk of a post-racial America and the celebration of the first black American president, you also saw the birth of Black Lives Matter, and Obama criticised for not speaking out enough about race. Irrespective of what happens here with the outcome of this election, are those issues going to remain? That fault line will remain in the country around the question of race and the inability to deal with the legacy of the nation's history.
America has a myth. America has this extraordinary myth, and on the one hand, the myth of American exceptionalism has fueled us, and we are indeed a great nation. Unfortunately, because of that arrogance, it's really difficult for America as a whole to admit when we've been wrong, to admit that much of our greatness has been possible only because of the suffering and the sacrifice and even the extermination of Native peoples, Black people, the use of Asian labor and then discarding them during the Second World War. I mean, it just goes on and on. You know, that America doesn't want to deal. My hope is that as we struggle, that we will also become more honest. I'm not afraid of that. I actually think that you have to have the struggle, you have to have the reckoning, because a nation with this history of arrogance and attaching itself to a myth, the only way to break that apart is through difficult conversation and struggle and honesty, and folks like myself and others saying, "We love you, America, and you're not actually being what America was supposed to be, and we want to help you."
And so, Stephanie, as we see the election results come in tonight and we see the red-blue divide, I mean, we look at the wall. The red states are very much red. The blue states are blue, and if we look at the states in between, we can kind of predict a lot of it. Rural areas will be Republican, city areas will be increasingly Democrat. And so you have this division, this fundamental division in America. So how does that reckoning happen, let's say, with a Biden White House? And what role does having Kamala Harris as the first woman of colour in the White House make?
I truly believe that my hope is that Americans will lead this reckoning, honestly. It would be wonderful for us to have a president who will lead it. But what we've seen, even under Donald Trump, is that there are a whole lot of folks, including a lot of white people, who have said, we simply must deal. And so I'm not going to necessarily say the president that I think would do the best job of that. I think if you look at their statements, it's pretty obvious. Yeah. But my hope is that America itself, Americans, will step up and say that we are not whole. We are not a whole nation. We are divided. I grew up in a small town in Kentucky. And so when I see my state, I don't even recognize the state that I grew up in. My family is still there. I visit them and I feel scared in Kentucky in a way that I did not when I was growing up. So clearly something is broken in America. And my great hope is that Americans together will look around and say, we don't want to be this anymore. And that we will take responsibility for having those conversations and take responsibility for doing the structural work to dismantle racism. Not just to talk, but actually to look at the ways that racism so conditions life in America. And to say that, again, that's not who we want to be, and we are willing to make real sacrifices, systemic change, in order to become what the founders, let's be clear, the founders of America never pictured me being a leader or women, people of color, any of that. So I don't want to say, oh, what the founders believe, because they didn't picture me when they pictured that. But they still laid out certain principles that made it possible for me to be doing what I do in our church and in our country. And for us to become true to that, I think Americans as a whole will have to rise up, or at least a significant number of Americans will have to rise up and essentially take our nation back. That is my prayer.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you all.